Now,
Yes.
Pat, it's time to learn even more. It's time for a chat with Pat.
Yeah, and today we have with us Sarah Cain. She is known as the Crusader Gal. She's a political and cultural commentator who makes videos about the decline of the West, and she writes Homefront Crusade. She's the author of Failing Foundations, The Pillars of the West Are Nearing Collapse. Welcome, Sarah. Good to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, Sarah's been on the show, The Virtuous Life, my show, The Virtuous Life. I always enjoy talking with her. But today we're going to talk about an article she wrote in Crisis Magazine, an opinion piece, and it is about the mercy of withholding the Eucharist. This has been kind of a controversial topic in our church. And Sarah, before we kind of roll into some of your ideas and opinions in this article, we don't really talk much about the unworthy reception of the Eucharist, I don't think. So can you kind of fill us in on what does it mean when we say the unworthy reception of the Eucharist?
Absolutely. When we refer to that, what we're talking about is a person who is in a state of mortal sin, and then they go to receive the Eucharist. And then by doing so, they don't receive any of the graces that would normally be conferred upon a person by receiving the Eucharist. Instead, they actually harm themselves. They harm their own soul, and they compound whatever sin they originally, were guilty of, I guess you could say. And so that's one of the reasons why, as an individual, you should never actually receive in this state, which is what we call an unworthy state. And I know it grates people to sort of use that word, because in a certain sense, we're all going to be unworthy,
We're all
right?
unworthy.
We're only made worthy by the mercy of Christ.
Right.
However, we have this cooperation with Christ that we always, are going through. We're always engaged in a type of conversion. And so when we turn away from Christ, which is what we do when we engage in sin, we turn our hearts away from Him. We change in a certain sense. And so when we take something that is perfect, when we take someone who is perfect into ourselves who are marred by this sin, we engage in a sacrilege.
And I think it's interesting we use the word unworthily, but that's because St. Paul used it in Corinthians. I mean, so
right.
it's it's not a word that we use. And it's interesting. I just was having a discussion on this with a friend of mine this past week. But you start out your article talking about a priest, Father, is it Ian Vane? Did I say that right?
It is.
Can you tell us a little bit about that situation that led into this?
Absolutely. So Father Ian Vane is a priest in England, a Catholic priest, and he denied communion, or the Eucharist, to a British member of Parliament, a guy named Chris Coughlin, because Chris Coughlin voted publicly in support of what they're calling assisted suicide or euthanasia. And before Mr. Coughlin made that vote, he was notified by Father Ian Vane that you cannot do this. This is what the church teaches. You would be engaging in scandal in addition to supporting an intrinsically evil act. And Chris Coughlin went publicly and said that he didn't think that his faith had any bearing upon his decisions, which is a very strange thing to say for someone who holds the faith. And then he voted in this way, and so he received that I guess, public correction. Now, what's interesting about it, though, is really that this isn't more common. So I think that the fact that it received so much media coverage, including by the secular media, is interesting because this is a key part of our faith. The very sense that a person should not receive in this state of mortal sin when he's been privately corrected, he's been notified of the fact that he is in error.
Right, so
this
can't claim ignorance.
Foundational to our faith.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit here with, Sarah, I know we don't have tons of time, but in your mind, is there a difference about Catholics promoting kind of evil in this public square, like you just stated, and those who it's a more personal thing, like maybe living together and fornicating with your partner, or willing to violate church's stances on IVF or birth control, those kinds of things, because sometimes we talk about those as a matter of personal conscience. Do you see a difference here?
Both yes and no.
Okay.
So, I mean, those things that you mentioned are mortal sins, so we should not do them and then go and receive the Eucharist. At the same time, it is significantly worse if you engage in a public sin, because you're adding an extra layer. You're adding the sin of scandal, which is when we misinform other people about how to serve God, how to live in a Catholic way. And so when you have someone, let's just use the Member of Parliament, Chris Coughlin, as our sort of example here. He identifies himself as Catholic before the public. So the public thinks that the things that he does represent the Catholic faith. And so they think that they can live in the same way that he does and be a Catholic. And that's the trouble, and that's the sin of scandal, is for him to, by his actions, misinform others on how they can properly, how they can love, how they can serve God. And then also it results in other Catholics also being confused, even as they try, to live well and live properly. And it undermines the importance of the Eucharist. If we believe what it is that we say that we believe, this should be the most important part of our lives. And this isn't something that we can just kind of shrug at. Instead, this is foundational.
Right. So let's go back then to the title, The Mercy of Withholding the Eucharist. Why do you see that as a merciful act?
Well, because it means that the priest actually cares for the individual's soul. So as we were talking about earlier, there is, it injures the individual who receives the Eucharist in the state of mortal sin. And so the priest, knowing that, properly formed in theology, has to sort of make the choice. Does he just continue and pretend like he doesn't notice? Does he just continue to give the individual Holy Communion? Or does he do the opposite, which is what he actually did in this case, which is to say, not just that he didn't offer the individual Holy Communion, but that he was willing to engage with the media firestorm, that he was willing to engage with any parishioners who would be confused, who would be outraged, who would say theologically errant things about how, well, when we receive, it's healing or something. He would deal with all of that. Really an international story. Why? Because he cared more about this individual's soul than he did about the things that he would have to deal with to defend it. And that really is a priest who's acting in proper accord with his vocation, who's really answering his calling appropriately. And I think it's something that's beautiful to see. So that's the mercy to the individual soul. And then there's also a mercy to those around him who no longer are being misled about what their faith is and about how to serve. And so it presents a mercy to them as well by saying, this is not what we do, this is not what we believe. We believe in the intrinsic worth of the human person from conception until natural death.
Yeah.
And that matters.
Oh, Sarah, this is a great article, some great quotes in here that we just don't even have time to dig into, but thanks again for being with us today. I always appreciate your insights.
I love your show. Thank you so much.
Take care, Sarah. Have a good week ahead. Our guest today is Sarah Cain, known as the Crusader Gal, political, cultural commentator. Her book is Failing Foundations, the Pillars of the West Are Nearing Collapse.